Welcome to the HC Insider podcast. I'm Paul Chapman. Today we're joined by Colin Bryce to talk again on trading and traders in the energy and commodities markets. Colin is the founding partner of Energex, a natural resources and energy consultancy, and former global head of Morgan Stanley's commodities business, as well as chair of Morgan Stanley Bank International. Colin, thanks for joining us again.
Yes, thanks, Paul. Nice to talk to you again.
So last time we talked about what actually is a trading business and what are some of the things that leaders and organizations need to consider when building them and some of the pitfalls and the opportunities. I guess I wanted to move on to the individuals themselves. You've hired and trained a lot of traders, I guess over your period as well, gotten rid of some as well. What do you think makes a good trader?
Well, I think we talked in the last session, didn't we, about the fact that there were, in my view at least, very few that are very good. I mean, I think there are a lot of very capable people, but the exceptional people are few and far between. I guess if you set aside, the competitive advantage of the platform that the individual's working on, and the kind of support systems he or she would have from the corporation, then what you come down to, I think, is a series of behavioral characteristics, at least in my experience. That becomes the critical element. So, coolness under pressure is particularly important, especially these days in fast markets. You want people who just don't get, terribly fraught and panicked, and who can deal with a number of different balls in the air at the one time with a clear, cool head. Actually, that's quite easy to see when you're managing traders in times of difficulty. The folks who really are calm and collected under pressure come to the fore and are very visible, in fact. So that's important. I think folks have to be arithmetically agile. Wasn't necessarily my strong suit when I was a trader, but there we go. Folks have to be good mental arithmeticians. They don't have to be, majors in calculus or any of that kind of stuff, really, but need to understand numbers. Maybe bookmakers are the right sort of folks to start to recruit and turn into trainers. They have the need for the same kind of skills. Particularly important to me, I think, is that you need people who are what I would call non-egotistical. So folks who understand that the market's bigger than them, and they're not always right, even when they've taken good decisions that go wrong, as opposed to actually bad decisions that go wrong. So, I've seen a lot of cases where you have the, very highly qualified, never having failed alpha type individuals who just think, the market's wrong. They just get stuffed and they learn some pretty horrendous lessons in the process. So people who really have that humility, I think, is particularly important. At the same time, you have to have people who have the desire and the drive to succeed, and the desire to make money. They have to be hungry. So that's important. The folks have to have a very strong moral compass. It's very easy to be led astray in the international energy business in many different ways. And I once put it in terms of, I remember referring to a well-known mega failure at Houston-based, where I felt that what management were having to do there was to corral the amoral, and you don't want to be having to corral the amoral. It's just a terribly bad use of time. So you want people who have a strong moral compass there. So these behavioural characteristics are, I think, can be overlooked often, but they're terribly important in my view.
It's funny how some of those, two of those in particular, can change over time. Firstly, and perhaps obviously, is kind of the hunger piece. Secondly, I think, is that someone might have started their career being quite dispassionate about positions, but often with getting it right over quite a period of time can become quite zealous in their own beliefs and perhaps unwilling to walk away from them when the market shows otherwise. And you see some quite public statements on the direction of oil, and which usually is associated with some quite public losses later on. Do you see that temporal change in what makes a good trader?
Yeah, you sometimes see that. Folk get overconfident, I would say. When they start to believe in themselves to the exclusion of anyone else and anyone else's opinion. And while failure, I think, is an important way of learning lessons and a very important way of gaining the experience to be then able to exercise good judgment, having experienced that failure. You don't want folks to fail in a big and career defining way. And, you do see it from time to time. It's easy to get carried away, of course. It's one of these additional probabilities that as part of human nature that you need to try to expunge.
What about that hunger piece? Am I being unfair there, or does that change over time in your experience?
Well, it does. In fact, going back to the kind of racehorse analogy that we used, I think last time we spoke. Racehorses have their moments. Maybe as a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, for 3 or 4 races they excel, and then they've had their day in the sun. And to some extent, that can be an issue that you get with traders. So you get maybe trader who's had 3 or 4 or 5, very good years and has been rewarded very well, and then has a family and a house and, some nice cars and stuff, and they start to become risk averse because, they don't want to lose it all. They've got, what they set out for. The hunger's been satiated and, they lose their touch. They have had their day in the sun, and that can be an issue. People become risk averse.
And I guess we'll come on to that has implications for careers, because unlike joining as an engineer into a oil major, there's less opportunity for a career development. Trading and traders are typically flat organizations, and not all great traders make great leaders and managers. And as you say, the ones who've been successful might potentially become risk averse. I guess on the flip side, you've got prospect theory, where people become risk-seeking if they've had losses, which can create a lot of issues as well. You mentioned in the last episode, and I agree with you as well, having spent a long time in these markets from a talent perspective, there are very few individuals who are consistently excellent in any type of trading environment, whether they've got no information, blank sheet of paper each day. They're just those brilliant traders, and we can all mention some names. But the vast majority of traders, I guess, follow a bell curve of performance, but often it can be external factors, the type of organization they're in, the type of people they're around that leads to success. What are the external factors that makes a good trader that as a trading leader you need to set up to get the best out of people?
Yeah, so, you need good, experienced and very supportive management in place, and colleagues, so that you have the right degree of support and the right sort of culture around about you. I guess, in a business which is, operating really beyond the bounds of human rationality, you also need very credible systems for monitoring risk, and systems for monitoring limits and for monitoring performance, and for enabling you to have the data and the facts and figures that you need to be able to have that platform to then exercise your particular kind of behavioural advantages. We talked about reward structure. Clearly, you need to have a system in place that rewards people for good behaviour and rewards them in the long term, doesn't reward flash in the pan behaviour and encourage that. You need to have, I think, a meritocracy in place, which again is something which encourages people to, strive to perform well in a business. And when you talk about management, I think something quite important is that you need to have effective but non-intrusive management. I always felt you needed to give people the absolute maximum amount of control over their own time and activities that you possibly could, clearly within some very well-defined boundaries of, risk and et cetera, et cetera. But, the more people believe they're in control of their own destiny and their own time, I think the better they perform, in fact. I think when they're being ordered around and folk are looking over their shoulder at them all day long, why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? that's a very discouraging culture, and doesn't really get the best out of folks. And then I guess lastly, I think trading managers and leaders, if you like, need to be very credible. And part of credibility is having been there and done that. Of course, there are other aspects to credibility as well, honesty and integrity and decency and all these important things. But having been there, having done that, I think, helps folks on the desk who are, busy trading all day long, respect the decisions that are coming at them from their managers and leaders.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because some organizations have kind of developed structures where they've got a book leader who is that, right? The individual's been there, done that. They've got a track record and credibility in directing trades, or at least questioning them. But they've also set up other management systems to provide oversight over all of the risk piece, the compliance piece, and actually, I think as well, in some ways, help translate that trading business into the organization's broader culture. So there's been a number of ways people have structured that.
Yes, I think there's a difficult time comes for a senior trader when, he perhaps or she is a book leader, but not a trading manager, because they can't be both, particularly in this day of regulation where you have to have independence of oversight. You can't be both a trading manager and a book leader. And that becomes a very difficult point because, a lot of folks think, well, I'm now the book leader, the senior, to my next thing is to be a manager, but actually the person might not be suited to being a manager. So, what do they do? It's a kind of difficult one, actually.
Yeah, it is. The career path of a trader is very different to a typical career. I guess let's talk about that for a moment, and then it'd be good to overlay it over the market conditions and how that has affected people's careers. But what do you see as the career path that's typically open to a trader?
Well, I think there are some folks would tell you that the words career and trader would be an oxymoron, really. That it's not a role that necessarily one can think of in terms of a career. I would think that. I think that's not correct. That's one of the misunderstandings out there. But it's not as easy a process to plan a career for a trader as it might be for a general management trainee. Although I think I would point out that, again, taking the BP example, they've done a very good job of that over the years, taking their traders and developing them through other competencies in their wider business all the way through to a board level where they've benefited from having trading expertise on that at that highest level. So, it can be done, but most companies don't, I think, pay enough attention to how they're going to run people or help people, manage their careers most effectively. And of course, many traders themselves don't quite understand what their career path should be. It's, back to the old Robert Burns statement, if only we could see ourselves as others see us. Often you think, well, this is what I should be. This is what I'd like to be. This is where I get the highest pay, so I'm going to be that. But actually, if you took a good look at yourself in the mirror, you're not really suited to that, old chap. It doesn't work. And so, from both the employer side and the employee side, getting the right career path going for the individual with very specific trading skills is, I think, quite difficult. And you certainly don't want to, put people in places where they're behaviourally or intellectually ill-equipped to succeed.
It's fascinating, though, isn't it? Because actually, going back to what makes a good trader, someone who is commercial, mentally agile, all these things, and also with a high degree of a moral compass and all the behavioral skill sets you need to be able to influence other people to do what you need them to do, etc. Those individuals who have been developed by their organization, you mentioned BP, Goldman's and so forth, some of them have turned out to be fantastic leaders. And I think about people, we know as a company who have started off as traders and broke out of it into more true management type roles and have become exceptional leaders because they've got that market lens. They're much more attuned to customer needs. On the flip side, I see examples when people, I think where there can become a bit of a challenge is you see people who think they are a manager and leader, but in reality, they're just managing a small team in very defined trading structures and not actually, exposed to the broader challenges and operating models of a business. Because again, trading is quite unique. These people might not have any lens on how to manage a cash flow or all these other things that come with running a business. But there's a real talent pool there that if organizations could think about and should think about how they can actually develop these people to become broader leaders within their organization.
Yes, and I don't mean to be too pessimistic in making the comments I made, because there are a lot of people, as you say, very visibly who have risen through organisations. We talked about BP, and you've got people like John Manzoni, who's now one of the senior civil servants in the country. Ian Conn, who was the CEO of Centrica. Folks who have been trained and developed from their trading roots into being effective managers and leaders. And there are lots of other examples. The late Ian Taylor would be a great example of a doyen of the business who started out as a trader and became the leader and manager of one of the biggest and best commodity trading companies.
And yourself, Colin.
Well, no, I think, I think you should probably cut that bit, actually, Paul.
I think I'll keep it in. It has been a really rocky road, though. If you look at the, mentioned in the last episode, the sort of black swan events that have come and disrupted people's careers. I mean, you had, I just think of a couple of examples. You had a lot of traders in the late zeros, however you describe it, who, when the banks came in or hedge funds came in, that took traders out of organizations like oil majors, where they were learning the markets as well, or utilities, where they were learning the physical markets, lured them over with quite lucrative guarantees and so forth. And then very quickly, those organizations exited the space. There were some very public blow-ups that happened with the hedge funds, and you had people whose careers kind of got really disrupted just by the vicissitudes in the market. And I think one of the fascinating things now is if you look back, that trader that stayed at the oil major, that didn't get lured away to a bank or a hedge fund, in the end has probably done on an annualized basis much better than the ones who moved to perhaps a riskier role. Because I guess there is the career choices a trader has to make is, how are they going to position themselves from a risk-reward standpoint themselves? Are you going to go to a hedge fund or a trading house where the rewards are greater? You might get a percentage of your P&L, etc. But again, the expectations are much higher, or the willingness to cut people based on performances is much greater.
Yes, well, horses for courses. I mean, some people are looking to take these risks and be part of that, high reward, high risk part of the business, and others would prefer to be a little more stable and secure. And that's down to individual preference and the type of company that these folks would gravitate to. But it's not a new thing to see fallout in our business. I can think back to when I started trading, and the number of folks, maybe there were 300 or 400 or 500 people that I maybe knew as a young trader, and you could count in fingers of one hand the number of people that ended their career in the business. Really, there's always been fallout. It's a high risk business by its very nature. It's a performance orientated business. We've looked at how very difficult it is as a business, as well as how very difficult it is for individuals to manage all the conditional probabilities associated with success. So, some folks will look at that and they'll say, well, actually, I want to be a little bit more secure, so I'm going to take the more stable path. And other folks will throw caution to the wind, and as part of their nature, they'll say, no, I'm going to go for it.
Mm. And I think it comes back to that. We were doing a lot of quotation today, but know thyself it is quite hard. I think you can have individuals who perhaps don't realize, and we have this discussion a lot on the search side. How do you tease apart what is the system, the setup, the management, the leadership, the compensation, the culture of an organization that's leading to their success, and how good is that individual themselves? And it's not necessarily a binary thing, right? It has to match the individual to the organization. And I think that's really tricky for people, especially if you've had a few really good years. They then take the big opportunity to go into a higher risk but higher reward organization, potentially, and it all crumbles because perhaps they didn't identify what were the key factors making them good in that organization. And that's a very tricky thing, I think, to piece apart.
Yeah, it is. It's difficult. And, it's why people, can avail themselves of your services as an expert in, human capital and all that means, and why, people can avail themselves of the Energex services in terms of, how to fit this whole thing together. In both cases, I think it's money well spent. It's this ex ante, getting the problems out of the way ex ante before they occur. Really, I think that's worth a lot.
Changing tack, how has the skill set of a trader changed, over your tenure?
Well, it's more techie, isn't it? And, there's more numeracy really required in the whole thing, less glad handing, sales and trading type stuff, or sort of sales and marketing, type stuff. So, and also I think more regulation and more bureaucracy to deal with, so clearly less fast and loose. But I think the big thing for me about technology, really in what it's done for the business is it's enabled there to be a finer grained division of labour, which I think in good old Adam Smith terms is a good thing, and a positive value add to the process if you can rely on systems to do things which individuals took a long time to do. Not only does it reduce costs very significantly, but it enables individuals to then think about doing other things and dividing their skills and dividing labour and specialising. And I think that's very, very important as a value add and a very important effect of technology on the opportunity set.
Although it adds its own complications in the sense that many of those more sort of operational type roles that people would do, whatever it might be, from fixing trades to data inputting and so forth, scheduling pipelines, etc. That was part of how an individual understood and built their knowledge about trading itself. And, those trade assistants, desk analysts, operators, schedulers would be the nursery pond for the traders. But if you automate a lot of that, you don't have the same opportunity to learn the business from the ground up.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, Paul. You're 100% correct. I believe wholeheartedly in the model where folks have gone through shipping nominations and back office clearing work and grounding, if you like. You get companies now like VACT, for example, who have set up to use that blockchain technology to automate all of that stuff in one place, which is great, and it reduces costs, I think, very significantly for players in the marketplace. But you have that downside that you then don't get the folks having the hands-on training that I think was ever so important for people as they progress in their career. So your point is very well taken.
And I guess organizations need to find other ways to simulate that, so people can build up their expertise.
That's not easy. I think, and I'm not sure, maybe I'm missing something. Having had a few years sort of out of the front line of the business, and more in the consultancy side, but I don't see evidence really of how that piece has been replaced effectively.
Which ties back into that lack of talent at that junior to mid-level. I look at natural gas businesses here in the States. You used to have sort of 40 people, 35 supporting 5 traders or 5 books. And now you've got one trader and a junior trader. Lots of that those other roles have been outsourced or have been automated, which again, are we going to go through a bit of a trading renaissance as markets become more volatile over the next decade? Potentially, it is going to be where are we going to get these people from? Is going to be a real challenge. And then it comes back to, as you said, in the last episode, organizations being able to clearly articulate their competitive advantages in how to make the best career for a trader. And that's going to be, this is how we've set up the organization. This is how we protect you from potentially compliance issues, regulatory issues, etc. This is how we reward you. But this is also how we're going to develop your career, which might be, it's going to be attractive. I guess a couple of final questions. One for me is, where does that BD kind of business development sort of originator skill set start and trader end, if you'd like?
Yes, that's part of the misunderstood piece, isn't it, about what a trader is and what a trader isn't. And I think as we defined it first time round, we talked about someone who buys and sells at the market interface with a specific function, purpose in mind, and that would probably exclude the business developer originator and put that category of individual into a different bucket, really. But no less important, of course. I think as the information edge is eroded by technology over time, it becomes customer flow and the power of flow of business that is the potential competitive advantage that comes potentially with size, but it also comes with a very strong business development origination business where you have people, going out into the marketplace and helping firms who have a risk understand how to prosecute that risk at the market interface. So even though it's not in the purest sense trading per se, as we've been talking about, it's equally important. And it's all part and parcel of the activities of a trading business.
We're certainly seeing, I guess, demand on that side as perhaps I think as well in a world where trade is perhaps a bit more constricted, building up those key anchor clients and partners is important to business plans. So I guess final question, what advice would you give to a young trader looking to build their career? What would you be saying to her or him?
Things have changed as we've talked about. I mean, when I started out in 1978 at the British National Oil Corporation, if anyone can remember who they were, the folks I worked for were very intelligent, chaps, but also very kind of socially acceptable fellows who, went out to lunch and every now and again bought or sold a cargo of oil. And, that was all pre the fast markets and is a thing of the past and has to be consigned to the past, really. These days you have to say to people, well, look, get skilled up in data acquisition and data manipulation. Get skilled up and be tech savvy, I think is very important. I think, have a good look at what the new, potentially new markets are likely to be. And I think, most obviously, the renewables markets may hold some prospect, and the path to net zero carbon markets, as I would call them, so LNG, gas, holds some prospect. I think, going back to doing difficult things in difficult places or outguessing the market, that stuff's all gone. So, these were, as we talked about, a more colourful time in the markets that, were consigned to history. So yeah, I mean, get to understand and major in these things, but, going back again to the other aspect, the behavioural aspect, look at yourself and make sure you're the right type of person, that you have the right behavioural characteristics, of humility and integrity and playing by the rules and, hunger to succeed, and some of the things we talked about earlier. And if you feel you have these characteristiks and that you can acquire some of the skills that are needed these days, then go and see what's out there on the frontier. Just to highlight one thing actually, which is slightly different from that, seems to me to be an interesting opportunity in the more traditional business. I remember well in the 80s as North Sea Oil developed, it created a milieu and a movement, if you like, based in London of all these folk coming into trading companies and doing deals with each other in a very exciting time. And strikes me the same thing is present right now in the US Gulf to some extent, at least, with all the Permian and the US production and increasing exports of that and the internationalization of the US cargo market. And I would have thought there has to be some kind of parallel with the mid-80s in the North Sea, where you have an exciting opportunity to, develop something and be part of something that's of the more traditional business, really, rather than of the new end. So, there are things at either end, and you'll know about that, of course, being in Houston. I'm sure.
I wondered that party might be near closing time, given some of the stuff that's going on. But well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on and taking some time to actually, I think, for me as well, step back and think about trading and the talent that it requires. And it's been phenomenal to get your insight. And obviously, this is what you're doing on a day-to-day basis for your clients.
Yes, that's right. We like to think that as folks who are involved in the business and building business and doing the business ourselves at a senior level, that we've brought to Energex some skills that are a little differentiated from some of the other folks out there in the consultancy space. And certainly our early success has demonstrated that there's a need to tap that type of skill. So we're very, very pleased about that and about the way things have gone. It's very kind of you to offer me the opportunity to talk to you, and I've enjoyed it very much.
Not at all. Well, thanks so much for your time, and look forward to checking back in a couple of years and see where the business is all at on this podcast. But thanks again, Colin.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you for listening to the HC Insider podcast. To find out more about HC, go to hcinsider.global, where there's more news and content focused on the commodities markets.